And with that, I would like to introduce our very first speaker for the day, Dr. Yasmin Headley. Dr. Yasmin Headley is a relational psychotherapist who works in private practice and is an associate lecturer at Regent's University in London. She has worked with thousands of clients over the years with short and long-term therapy approaches, including psychodynamic, integrative, cognitive behavioral, imagery therapy, and stress reduction techniques. Over her extensive service with many individuals and couples, she strongly believes we need far more love and kindness in the world. Today, Dr. Headley will highlight an essential but easily overlooked part of our lives, sex. Who's really thinking about sex when we are battling life and death every day? Here's what Dr. Headley has to say in her topic, Sex and Intimacy in the Time of COVID.
So, hi. So it's a Sunday and you're here and I'm going to be talking about sex and relationships. Now, when I grew up in Malaysia, so my family, Malaysia and the UK, and there was no sex education at all. I hope there is some now. I was at school with Sheila Menon, in fact, and we were at Convent Bukit Nanas. And the nearest I got to sex education was in biology. It was chapter 13. And there was a diagram of a rabbit and its reproductive organs. I was really looking forward to that class. Gosh, was I looking forward? I might learn about sex, right? But what happened was the teacher came in the class and she skipped the chapter. Totally skipped it. Chapter 13. You know, it's like those hotels where they have level 4 and then they have level 14, but they've skipped level 13 because it's bad luck. So she skipped chapter 13. So of course I wanted to know, but all the other students kept quiet. But I put my hand up. I said, Miss. I said, and then she said, okay, Yasmin. She gave me that resigned look again. She's asking questions again. I said, Miss. So how do people have babies? And then she said, you know, like dogs do. So then I put my hand up again. I said, Miss. So how do dogs have babies? And then she says, Yasmin, stop playing the fool. Have you no shame? And actually, I really didn't know how dogs had babies too. So I'm going to talk about sex because maybe we don't talk about it enough. And it's also about relationships too. And how things have changed actually. Now it's on TV, kids can look up the internet. And the thing is, when we don't talk about it and we don't look at it, we'll have relational issues later. It's almost assumed that as soon as you get married then anyway, that you'll know everything. It will all, the knowledge will appear on your wedding day, light will appear and God will suddenly, with this knowledge will suddenly be imparted. You know, but sex does matter. And we think, you know, we'll figure it out, we'll read a magazine, we'll sort it out and everything. But I would suggest a little more like research on it. The World Health Organization, going back to what's really going on now, said the true death toll from COVID-19 pandemic might be 3 times to 4 times more than the actual figures. So we're talking about 3.4 million at the moment. So the stated figures, so it could be 10 or more. So why talk about sex? Why talk about those things? But relationally, something's going on out there in the world. And that's why I'm talking, because there's still a few billion people still involved in their homes. Things are going on. So what I'm going to do is share the screen and move on to this then. And go to the next bit. And I'm going to be talking about sex and relationships pre-COVID, lockdowns and the research. I'm going to look at past research, present research, not extensively because I've only got 20 minutes, and then sex and relationships during lockdown and post-COVID, which I anticipate. I mean, we've got another lockdown now, who would have thought? And we might not also open up in the UK, hear all sorts of other things again. So we don't know yet. And then on moving forward with relationships, I'm going to suggest things you can do, not just after COVID, but now, that we should be doing now, okay? And then next one. So pre-COVID. Well, there's always been internet and porn a lot since, especially the 1990s, even though it was invented in the 85 at a university. Actually, it was just to send emails then. And the ways of meeting and dating, they would usually, if you remember 2019, what happened? It was normally through at work, school, university, travel. Dating apps were available. And before the pandemic, also, what's really notable is how people stayed on in relationships. They outstayed. They seemed to wait for a natural ending or hope, or we'd hope, oh, well, maybe they will change. Maybe things will get better. So I would find clients 3, 7 years, 10 years waiting on, but actually it hadn't been sorted. This sort of hope that, hey, maybe this will sort itself out. But then people started to realize with the first lockdown and second lockdown that, hold on, maybe what happens if there's going to be another pandemic? Who am I going to be stuck with? So it'd be needing to think of that. And also another thing was thinking about values, more due diligence being carried out in relationships, and looking at that. Then, of course, there's the scams. The scams pre-COVID were more, there were in person and there was some quite a bit online, but there were more in person, very persuasive, romance type scams or scams on investments. Yeah. Now, the issues with sex I'm talking about because we'd be looking at then certainly more the foundation, trust and safety. And I can't say enough on safety. I don't think we look at that enough, the idea of being safe in a relationship. And when COVID comes, that's when we start to notice that. So let's go to the next one. Next one then is lockdown 1. So there's an interesting thing, a study that was carried out. People were busy beavering away with lots of research into when COVID is going on right now, even 2020 and 2021. So researchers will always research. We can always depend on that. So from 26 in the study to 60 years old, despite the pandemic's psychological consequences, when asked directly, most couples responded they did not perceive any difference in their sexuality. So that was lockdown 1. If you remember, lockdown 1 was making banana bread. If you look at Instagram, what would happen? Condo your house, make it totally clean, everything. So lockdown 1 is very different than all the other lockdowns that came in. And we look at the next one. So that was that awareness there. Oops, let's go. And from that research there, that one, the first one I mentioned, there's graph 1, 2, 3, 4. Graph 1 is desire, graph 2 looks at arousal, graph 3 look at orgasms, and graph 4 looks at frequency. And according to open-ended answers, the people started, if you broke it down, you'd see that females had more specific changes for the women, because their worry, lack of privacy, and stress were more notable in the females than in the males. And even though participants showed high levels of resilience, the negative aspects of lockdown could affected their sexual life, particularly with females. Now, the dark area is the males, and the lighter area is the females. Yeah. Now, the past research, we have to go back to past research, because to understand COVID, we have to look before COVID. It bears this out. It bears this out on the female sexual response. And previously, the studies indicated that stress, anxiety, and depression have a negative impact, especially on women's sexuality. And women's responses to sex were more affected, maybe stress or children being around. Remember, with lockdown, schools were also being closed. And this lack of privacy really affected them more. So all the studies from the different places, which, by the way, I've listed in the bibliography at the end, if you want more details and to look them up on it. Then we go to the present research. And present research, all 2021s and 2021s are starting to come out. It showed how, these are research from China, Brazil, Italy, America, how even then it ties in again that there was a decrease in sexual satisfaction and activity, and a decrease in arousal, satisfaction, and difficulty in reaching orgasm more for women. So women have been more affected by this. Right. Well, let's look at during lockdown, what happened? Now, despite lockdown and a fear of COVID infection, and despite a mandate telling us not to go out, what's the best way to find out if people are really following the rules or not? Yeah. So there's an interesting study of sexual STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, in a dermatology clinic in Cagliari in Italy. And in that would be a good way to test it, because they had to keep open, right? And at that time, there was no vaccine, nobody knew anything. So, and they noticed that it still remained the same. The levels of infection remained the same. That means people were going out. They were meeting, they were dating. And I'm sure you must know people that have been going out, dating and everything. I've been quite surprised with clients sometimes. They're meeting on apps, and they're planning their next meeting or next person. And at first, for example, what is interesting, even talk to some escorts, even the escorts, at first it was like totally empty, nobody was going. But then later it picked up, and I'll talk about that later. And the scams, by the way, the scams during lockdown, actually they got crueler in a way, because I know some people who've had those romance scams, because there's no real way of checking it, because it's all more internet based. Some very cruel scams actually on romance things, so be careful there. And then people also seem to go into this sort of incubation, i.e. as they go into their bubbles, and from one bubble, they would then move to another bubble, but almost breaking bubble rules, because we were not meant to have big bubbles. If you remember, we were meant to just stay with a certain number of people, depending on the lockdown and what level it was. And clients also started to realize when they were in lockdown, how bad their marriage or relationship was, because they didn't, this time thing I talked about earlier was being looked at more differently. This is the person I'm really spending my life with. There's not as many distractions. We all normally use distraction to help us to go out when we're working, and then we come back home. But now there'd be all sorts of other things they'd start to notice. And they realize the lack of freedom in being with the wrong person. And then there are those who are unable to maintain relationships in the midst of the pandemic. And they notice that too, because they haven't had the distractions. Now, this was let's put it up there, right? This was, so Sex and Internet. I put here, in the New York City Health Department, I was so surprised to see this. It was like an edict. It was like a mandate. You are your safest sex partner, and masturbation will not spread COVID. So there was like advice to masturbate. And it was not just that, it was happening in the UK too, and other parts of the world, that suddenly it was like it was okay. I mean, I just seem to remember it being a sin and all that. So how the world has changed. But I guess even the religious leaders were quiet at this time. Then we got Pornhub here, worldwide traffic changes. Pornhub is a pornographic website, and it really rose, some 50, some 100%, particularly when they offered a service of 1 month's free. Italy like tripled. It was so high. But if you remember, in Italy, the COVID cases were even the worst at first. So it makes sense that if they were having super lockdown, they were like having super lockdown, and not able to go out at all. And even in Spain, so people were boarding dogs so they could have extra walks if they could walk, boarding people's dogs because they weren't allowed to go. Or people were going with empty bags to look like they were shopping, because that was the only reason you could go out, walking the dog or shopping. Then incubation, I call it incubation because it's a bit like heating the eggs and waiting for them to hatch, from lockdown to lockdown. So I'll give an example. These aren't real names, of course. And Anna and Ray met on the app after the first lockdown. And by the second lockdown, they were fine. But by the third lockdown, getting there, and things started opening up a bit, like in the UK, it started opening up a bit. You could go to a restaurant or things like that. Then there were issues. Then they noticed issues because suddenly issues of trust, safety came up, because they would see their partner with somebody else. And during lockdown, it was a wonderful love bubble, almost wonderful way of being in a place that they couldn't have suddenly. It was, you couldn't repeat that sort of romance. And how do you deal with your partner then being able to go out and chat to other people? If you've got issues of trust before, you certainly will find it out now. Then I have Jane, who broke up before lockdown, and then a lot of people were living with their mothers and then not able to go out because they didn't want to bring back the contamination. So then also realizing, hey, I need to be figuring out my life, where I want to go. And then I've got Peter, a student, studying online. Now everything was online, food was online, webcam, internet, sex, everything. And the issue here was with Peter, and with the concern with a lot of younger people nowadays, is about erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation. Now with erectile dysfunction, you can still ejaculate even when the penis is soft, but when it comes to having a relationship, there are difficulties having relationships because they are unable to penetrate. And of course, then without knowing it, they would keep up this facade that they can have a relationship, but they can't really because they're unable to penetrate. And then they would then feel they have they'd have issues having relationships. It's almost like a vicious circle going on. And their partner or potential partner would think it's their issue or something wrong with them, when really the porn needs to be looked at, and a lot of habits need to be changed. Then I have, it's not in yours, Jean and Joe, who met online. They met online from the start, but Jean didn't know that Joe has a problem meeting in person. And then, so Joe has set up almost to break up. It was something I'd warned the client actually about, because sometimes if people only meet online, when they meet in person, they're going to have difficulties relationally, which we do not know about. So there's all sorts of commitment issues that will come out once lockdown ends. Then I go to the next one. Affairs. Okay. Well, there's been who would have thought that affairs can still go on? So Jay often before would meet partners on an app and meet them in person. Now was unable to because their wife was at home or their partner's at home, and they'd be watched. We would get monitored. We get noted, like, where are you going now? You know, I'm just going to the kitchen. There's only so many places we can go, right? When we're being in lockup. And then there was another example of a woman very alone during COVID, and she used to meet her married lover during the weekends and during the week at hotels, but now unable to do so. People are meeting with webcam and with internet, but some people prefer it in person. Then H, who's married a long time, usually would go meet people on conference and business trips. Now unable to. We're not doing that. So there's so many life changes with people needing to think about their primary relationship that needs to be sorted out, really. And now I'm going to go back to the escort I mentioned. So the escort, I was talking to, is a friend by the way, had said how work actually dried up. There was no work suddenly with the lockdown. But then suddenly she could meet all clients, because all clients had met her in person anyway. And a lot of married men then started doing webcam work with her. And so it was still going on. Now, some people think webcam and internet is not an affair, but it is very emotional still anyway. So maybe you don't touch, but there's still emotional issues going on, and it's still outside the primary relationship. And lawyers, by the way, in some firms reported a demand for divorce was 122% in July, October 2020 between the lockdowns compared to the year before, compared to 2019. And the issues tended to be more coercive control, if not affairs. It was coercive control at home. Okay, then next. Abuse. I mentioned that because that's important as therapists for us to notice and to be aware of that they can come up. And between April and February this year, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline noted a 61% increase. There's higher levels of violence, and domestic violence tends to be a hidden issue and exacerbated during lockdown. As therapists, we really must be aware when clients come, could be domestic abuse, sexual abuse, all sorts of things going on, and with coercive control. And I go to, so post-COVID, internet sex and webcam and virtual sex will still be high. It won't be not high, but people will be meeting one person. And there are also robots now, male and female robots, all these things. I think the world has opened up to more of these things. There will be sex addiction, so we've got to worry about ED, erectile dysfunction, NPE, and a few other types of addictions. And also the issues with sex might exacerbate. But people will be, my guess is, addressing things, sex and relationships more. So sexual abuse, domestic violence, be aware. It's a silent thing. People don't mention it. There's a lot of shame there. And time, people will address matters, and also with scams. We got to be easily aware. It's amazing how they can use the phone for banking scams, and it looks like it's from the bank number. And then there'll be more breakups, also makeups too. And looking at that with relationships, so that I make sure I cover everything. With our primary relationships, maybe we've not really seen the person as well as we need to. So go to bed, sleep earlier, less TV, explore, discover, make it fun. I suggest having a lot more fun in our lives. Learn about relationships and sex, read. There's some really good books. I'm recommending some books at the end. And sometimes we have overexposure with our partner, in which case what we need to do is do other things too. Have different kind of hobbies and interests, so that when you meet, you organize when you're going to meet, like, oh yeah, okay, let's chat at 8 p.m. or whatever, and then we can continue more. Or at least to organize, like date nights, dating your partner, no matter how long you've been married. It doesn't matter. It's keeping it fresh. And communication, there's the 5-to-1 ratio we need to look at. So it's 5 positive to 1 negative. I've given that reference in the bibliography. So 5 positives, look for that. That really does help relationships. Reduce the negatives we use, and sensate focus, touch more often. And sexual health really does affect mental health, and mental health back again to sexual health. I think that's so, so important on how we can keep our body, the yin yang, keep ourselves going, keep ourselves healthy, and work on your relationship and sex life. And need to read, study, look online. Try not to go to some of the newspapers I've seen, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how can they give that advice? But read books, go see somebody, get therapy, help. I mean, we have one life, and as therapists, I've had different therapy at different times over the decades, and different issues come up, and it's always good to sort out as we go along. I'm not sure on time, but so I talked today on sex and relationships pre-COVID, lockdowns and research. I looked at past research and present research, and sex and relationship during COVID and post-COVID, and I also discussed moving forward with relationships. So I did have a film, but I think we've gone over. I don't know. Can someone tell me?
Yes, you have, Dr. Headley.
Okay, so I will just go to the bibliography now then. No need to see. This is about, it was a funny clip about judging about internet use, but we'll go to the next one, and that is the references then. And here you have the list of all the, I referred to today, the articles, and also the books finally. And I have left a PDF if you want it. So if there's any questions, I will stop share now as I've gone over. And
hi, Dr. Yasmin, this is Anna here. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
All right, so there's some statements and some sharings there as well regarding domestic increase in domestic abuse. And I think we've got a sharing here from Anna, who says she's from Portugal, and she says that she's been supporting women in their 30s who are feeling they're alone, and they're feeling that they will not be able to find a partner and have children, as if they've been isolated during the lockdown. So I think also they've, just as you've mentioned, they've tried the internet and been scammed as well. So
I know, how sad.
yeah, so this is, and another question here is that have you found any correlation or effect of religious beliefs affecting the COVID time affairs or relationships?
What do they mean by COVID time affairs?
Okay, that means whether any based on any tradition or religious beliefs, whether how it would affect the relationship.
Well, I found that people with religious beliefs would stay in a relationship longer. They would really try much longer.
Yeah.
But
I guess,
but it takes two people. It takes two people. So two people would want to need to change to make it work. Yeah.
And I think maybe because just to share something that happened in Malaysia, I think when we had our first lockdown, you were talking about how in the US they were saying, okay, you can increase, be your own partner and things like that.
Yeah.
So there was some effort, but which was not taken very well, was that the Ministry of Women, Family and Community actually came up with infographics to encourage women to be kind, to dress up for their husbands. But they came up with infographics which actually had a backlash. But it's very interesting because the ministry seems to think that the men we need to provide for the men, but it was not in the reverse. I never saw anything that came up for women. They even used Doraemon, the character Doraemon, for the infographics. So it's very interesting because nothing was said about how the women felt and what were the women's needs.
And that's what the research showed, that women were the ones that actually felt the greatest levels of depression and anxiety. Yeah. Yeah.
So I do believe there are traditional differences, because I think in our community, no one wants to talk about the women's needs, but it's very easy to talk about men's needs. I think so I guess this is something that is different across the globe as well.
It's culture, but if you remember in culture, do you remember there was no AIDS in Thailand? It's what the government says, right? So, but the reality is very different. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Anna, as well. That's very true. And about safety, and safety is very important. It will vary for each person, and to be aware of that, because the level of safety, depending on if we grow up with domestic abuse, sexual abuse, it will affect how we feel safe. So it's learning to address that. Actually, it will be it takes work. There's work required.
Okay, I'm going to pass it back to our MC, Tanusha.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much for that eye-opening session. Thank you very much.